Thank you, Yinka. So my name is Jerry Bogaz. I'm an assistant director here with the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council staff. We are in a comment period for the draft of NYMTC's next regional transportation plan, which is titled Moving Forward. That comment period opened on June 28th and it will close on July 27th. As part of that comment period, we are doing 6 public review sessions. We did 2 of them on July 8th. Today we're doing one at 12 and one at 7 p.m. And then on July 22nd, we're doing the same, 12 and 7 p.m. All these sessions are virtual sessions at this point. We're using these sessions to talk about the plan, to give information about it, and also to collect any preliminary comments people may have. So it's an interactive session, as you'll see. We'll be using an interactive poll everywhere program to collect information. I want to acknowledge before we get into this, Jan Kahn, who is our regional planning manager. Jan and his staff have been working with the staffs of our member agencies for the last two plus years to develop this plan. And they've done an excellent job on pulling together information from all of our members and fashioning that into the draft plan before you. So thank you to Jan and his staff. And having said that, I'm going to ask Jessica to advance to the next slide, please.
So sorry, Jerry.
No, go ahead, Jessica. It's all yours.
So hi, everyone. I'm the second voice you'll be hearing throughout the presentation. My name is Jessica Ortiz. I'm the Public Information Officer, one of the Public Information Officers for NYMTC. I wanted to take a moment to walk you all through the WebEx platform that we're going to be using today. If you're accessing the meeting from a computer, the screen and button will look very similar to the image on this slide. The placement of these features will be different depending on the device you are using. So if you're using a cell phone, the buttons may be in a different place than the button features may be in a different place than what you see here. So there are 2 button features that I just want to point out. The first is the mute button. As you've already noticed, you have been placed on mute. This is to reduce the background noise and minimize interruptions to the presentation. You will be muted throughout the entire presentation. Please stay on mute. So today we are collecting comments and those will be addressed in the final plan. We will be collecting those comments in 2 ways. The first is by using the chat button. And once you have selected the chat button, you can type your comments in the window to the left and hit submit, and everyone will be able to see those comments. The second way we will be collecting comments is by using the Poll Everywhere platform, which Jerry mentioned. And so throughout the presentation, we've sprinkled question prompts to collect your comments. And to respond to the questions, go to pollev.com/NYMTC. We should be placing a link to that Poll Everywhere platform link, and Marisol just placed that to just help you access the questions better. So once you've gone to pollev.com/NYMTC, there are going to be a series of questions presented. So I'll give everybody a moment to access pollev.com. And so now that I've walked you through how to use Poll Everywhere, let's dive into our first question. So we're really interested to know where you're participating from today. The type of question that this Poll Everywhere question it's a map and image question. So when you see that on your screen or on your phone screen, you'll be able to place a pin to identify where you're participating from today. So I see that some people are participating from Suffolk County, some people are participating from Brooklyn, and we'll give people a couple more seconds to access polleverywhere.com/NYMTC and participate in the question prompt. And I see 2 more people have participated. One person have placed their pin. One person from Nassau County and the other person from Westchester. So I'll move on to the next question. We're really interested in finding out how you heard about the meetings today And there are a number of ways we got the word out about the meetings, and that includes by email, by snail mail, NYMTC Notes, which is our quarterly newsletter. We also sent out a media release to local newspapers. We've used social media to advertise the meetings. We also understand that word of mouth is a way that people just communicate about meetings, and then because there are other ways of finding out when meetings are happening. So I see some people have heard about the meetings through NYMTC Notes. Others have heard through word of mouth. I'll just give it a few more moments. Someone received notice about the meeting via email. And again, if you're just joining us and you'd like to participate in the poll, please visit pollev.com/NYMTC to participate. Great. And so you will have so throughout the presentation, you'll have other ways to provide feedback. And again, that'll be through the poll everywhere prompts, as well as just placing your general comments or observations in the comment message window. So I wanted to move on and go over some ground rules. As I've noted, everyone will be muted throughout the presentation except for the speakers. And again, it's to reduce any background noise. As I've mentioned, we're using Poll Everywhere and the chat window to collect comments today. And I also did want to note that the public meeting will be recorded for those who will not be able to attend. We're also hosting 3 more meetings that go over this presentation, as Jerry mentioned. That's another meeting today, July 14th at 7 p.m., and 2 more meetings on July 22nd at noon and at 7 p.m. And so now I'll hand it back to Jerry.
Thanks, Jessica. One thing to really acknowledge is the fact that there's an awful lot of information contained in this plan, and one of the things we're going to try to do with this session today is to orient you to that information and to underscore the fact that you can easily get to information that you're interested in without having to read the entire plan and all the appendices. There was a link in the title slide that we will show you again. That's a link to the web portal we have for the plan, where you can get summary information as well as the full plan documents themselves. So part of this effort will be to, again, orient you as well as take your initial comments. Next slide, Jessica. All right, so our objectives today, providing information, as I just said, about both the plan and the congestion management process, which is parallel and accompanies the plan, directing participants to additional information and documentation as necessary, collecting any public commentary you have for the formal response in the final plan document, and then directing participants to avenues for further commentary during the comment period, which again goes through 4 p.m. on July 27th. So if you do think of other comments you want to provide, or you just want to use this as an orientation session, and you have up until 4 p.m. on July 27th to provide additional commentary. And that's can be done through email through the website. Next slide. So we're going to show you a little bit of an overview about what NYMTC is and the planning process that brings federal money into our region. We're going to do that via a several minute long video that we have. So Jessica, if you could fire that up.
Welcome to NYMTC, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. Established in 1982, NYMTC is the metropolitan planning organization for New York City, Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley. Our 10-county region includes the 5 boroughs of New York City, plus Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland counties, and is home to more than 12 million people. NYMTC's principals include 9 voting members and 7 advisory members, comprised of 5 suburban county executives, 2 New York City commissioners, the New York State Transportation Commissioner, and the Chief Executive of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Advisory members include the New York State Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, the Chief Executives of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Transit, and the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, and the local administrators of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Federal legislation requires that metropolitan regions must have a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, to plan for and make decisions on the use of federal transportation funding. Approximately $10 to $15 billion of federal funding comes into the region during each 5-year funding period. NYMTC ensures that existing and future spending for transportation projects and programs is based on a cooperative, comprehensive, and continuing planning process. The elected and appointed officials who comprise NYMTC have a shared vision, recognizing that mobility, the ability of people and goods to move easily and safely to, from, and between locations, is crucial to the lives of everyone who resides in, works in, or visits within the NYMTC planning region. Therefore, we aspire to ensure that the mobility provided reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner, to invest efficiently for these transportation needs, and to respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. Moving forward is the next long-range regional transportation plan for the NYMTC region. Updated every 4 years, the Regional Transportation Plan is a blueprint that helps identify the transportation needs in NYMTC's planning area in order to guide the use of federal funding. NYMTC's plan covers all modes of surface transportation, including highways, roads and bridges, streets, rail and bus transit, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as freight and special needs transportation. Our region is facing difficult challenges. Despite that, looking to the future is as important as ever for the region's long-term vitality. Moving Forward proposes a regional vision that is built around 5 strategic goals. To provide a transportation system that ensures the safety and security of people and goods across all transportation uses and modes. To provide a transportation system that is maintained, operated, and coordinated to better enable reliable, easy, accessible, and seamless travel across the region. To provide a transportation system that efficiently serves today's population and plans for the growing number of residents, workers, and increasing amount of goods. To provide a transportation system that minimizes its impact on the environment, especially the effects of climate change. And to provide a transportation system that is resilient and can mitigate, adapt to, and respond to chronic and acute stresses and disruptions. As NYMTC pursues these goals through our regional transportation planning process, the following guiding principles inform our planning. We will consider the needs of all users across NYMTC's planning area as a whole in the planning process. We will make the best use of federal resources for the regional transportation system and increase them where practical, while leveraging local resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. We will monitor the performance of the regional transportation system as a means of prioritizing improvements and investments. We will support multi-agency approaches that enhance the integration of independently operated components of the regional transportation system. We will engage the public and community stakeholders. And we will harness technological advancements to improve our transportation system. People living in the NYMTC region are very aware of how their transportation system works and where it needs improvement. What transportation improvements are important to you? What matters most to your community? Your input is critical as we continue planning for our region's transportation needs. So how can you get involved? Attend a public workshop, or provide your thoughts through our website or social media channels. Visit our website to join our mailing list, register for a workshop, and more. So get involved. Together, we can keep our region moving forward. Welcome to NYMTC, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council.
No, not again, please. Great, thanks, Jessica. So if we go to the next slide, so that in a nutshell is what the organization is and what its role is in transportation funding and planning in our region. This is the process that we have to follow by federal regulations, starting with the orange circle at the top, which is the long-range regional transportation plan, defining long-range needs. That's the foundation step. But then there are other required products that include a unified planning work program, which really deals with federal planning dollars, and that those activities under the UPWP define the improvements that are needed to go into the Transportation Improvement Program, which is a 5-year program of transportation improvements that will use federal funding. And that's where these improvements are really defined, and funding is programmed for them. We do then, after that, have to do 2 assessments of the plan and program for congestion management and for regional emissions. And getting through all that part of the process gets us to the upper left circle, which is project planning and implementation. So that's really the objective here, is to get everyone on the same page with regard to how the funding is to be used to actually implement improvement projects, purchase new equipment, new facilities, so on and so forth. So this continuous cycle is what really is the planning process for the use of federal dollars in our region. Next slide, please. So the plan, it's federally required, and it defines the long-term transportation needs and desires over a minimum 20-year time frame. We usually do more than that. This particular new plan is actually 29 years. It's to be updated every 4 years, and it provides a blueprint that helps guide federal funding, as the video indicated. And it is developed collaboratively, not only amongst our member agencies, but with other interested agencies and other stakeholders and the interested public. Next slide. The plan covers all modes of surface transportation, as the video indicated, and it addresses key transportation activities such as operations and management of the transportation system, safety and security, and regional finances. Next slide. We did do extensive public outreach to develop the draft plan. What we're doing now is the required public review of the draft plan. But last year, actually in our original schedule, the public outreach program was slated to begin in March of 2020. We all know what happened in March of 2020 last year, so we had to recast our public outreach program to be a virtual program, which ran from roughly late May through the end of September. It included online potential workshops, regional workshops, on an online engagement platform that was available 24/7 for that entire period, online focus groups with specific groups of people, including residents of communities of concern and users of specialized transportation service. We did social media advertising to alert people to the availability of these resources, and we worked with local partner organizations to spread the word as widely as we could in each of the 3 sub areas: New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. Finally, we did a pollfish survey of about 1,000 respondents and gleaned information from that. So overall, over 4,000 individual people participated in this virtual outreach program, which, given the fact that it was put together rather quickly in response to the pandemic, was very successful, and our members considered the input of those individuals in developing the plan. Next slide. So now the plan's context, future needs. So this is the key foundation of the plan. It defines the likely growth and future conditions that we'll face in terms of population, employment, and ultimately travel. Next slide. It's based on socioeconomic and demographic forecasts in areas such as population, employment, labor force, and number of households. And these metrics are forecasted in 5-year intervals to the plan's horizon year. Next slide. We do these forecasts for a 31 county multi-state metropolitan region that is really divided into several subregions, including New York City, Long Island, the lower and mid Hudson Valley, northern New Jersey, and southwestern Connecticut. And we participate in the efforts outside of our planning area with our colleagues in metropolitan planning organizations such as the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority in northern New Jersey and several smaller councils of governments in southwestern Connecticut. Next slide. Now, COVID-19 obviously has had an impact, and it's significantly disrupted SED trends in the short term from up until 2019 to right now. So adjustments have been made to these forecasts to reflect short-term impact and resulting economic uncertainty. However, the primary purpose of the forecasts is the long-term outlook. And of course, that long-term outlook is less susceptible to short-term volatility. So those forecasts will demonstrate both of those things. We're still looking at growth in the long term, but then there's the short-term effect of COVID-19. Next slide. So the overall forecast, I guess, Jessica, we're going to go to the web portal for this. No, that's the video. So if we want to look at the 2017 base year numbers in population, approaching 13 million people in our planning area. As you can see, over 7 million jobs, civilian labor force of 6.5 million, and average household size of 2.75 rather. In 2050, we're forecasting an increase to over 14 million people in population, over 8 million people in 8 million jobs, over 7 million civilian labor force, and a drop in the average household size. And if you do the comparison between those two, you can see the level of change we're talking about here. Significant change in the long term, somewhat reduced from earlier forecasts by, of course, the pandemic in the shorter term, but still significant growth and a continuing drop in the size of the household, which is important to travel patterns because the household is the primary generator of travel. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So these SED forecasts are really the foundation of the use of a simulation model to forecast travel, and they resulted in this set of information about future travel as forecasted through this process. So you're seeing significant increases in daily trips, daily auto trips, an even greater increase in daily transit trips, vehicle miles of travel, or VMT, forecast to increase, and of course, vehicle hours of travel also increasing. So you're talking about generally increasing travel in the long term, which is going to put extra stress on an already congested system and require responses in certain ways. And that is sort of the foundational challenge of the long-range plan. Next slide. We also looked at freight flows. This was taken from Transurge data, and you can see that, first of all, there are numerous types of freight flows in our region. You have goods moving in, goods moving out. You have goods moving between areas within our planning area. And then, of course, we are also a corridor region in terms of goods moving through that originate outside of our planning area and are destined outside of our planning area. We're looking at significant growth in all of these factors, and it's very difficult to predict how much additional growth may be generated by changes in business models brought about by the pandemic. So you can assume that there might be additional growth on top of this. So freight flows will continue to grow and will continue to put stresses on our transportation network. Next slide. We did look at some drivers of transformative change over the next almost 30 years. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic is transformative change in the short term, but we're also looking at trends in the model. In the plan that affect personal mobility, the evolution of shared mobility, the pace of technological development, e-commerce and distribution innovations for goods, and distributed manufacturing. All these things are described in the plan as areas where transformative change in transportation could happen over the period of the plan through 2050. Next slide. We also looked at some large-scale disruptors that could affect these forecasts, including climate change and extreme weather events, energy transformation, changing demographics and lifestyle, and work style expectations. And that, the COVID-19 impact on work style expectations is yet to be fully defined, but certainly could be very significant. And changing land use patterns was the other large-scale disruptor. Next slide. So when we looked at these impacts of potential transformative change, we realized that it's very difficult at this point to quantify many of them, but we can qualitatively assess our forecasts within the context of these change agents. So the plan states that it's likely that the impacts of transformative change on the forecast will be somewhat muted during the first 10 years of the plan, but beyond that initial 10-year period and onward through the 2050 horizon year, the impacts become increasingly uncertain, and it's not yet possible to reasonably forecast when and how the drivers will mature, but therefore that leaves a little bit or significantly more volatility in those longer term forecasts based on how these changes may play out. Next slide. So this is back to Jessica at this point to take us through our next interactive exercise.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. So the next three questions will be open-ended questions. And this first question is just to gauge if you have any comments on the scale of the growth forecast. So these open-ended questions allow you to, and I'll give people a minute or two to respond. And again, if you are just joining us or joined us a little bit late, in order to participate in this poll question, please visit pollev.com/NYMTC. And so these open-ended questions allow participants to, just as you see on the screen, provide a one-word response or a string of words to just provide any comments or observations that you may have on the scale of the growth forecast that Jerry just presented. So give everybody a minute or two. Right? And again, if you feel like you need to review the information that Jerry presented, we're going to include the link to the website so you can review that information on your own time, and you have until the 27th of this month to provide comments. So I'll go to the next question. And this is another open-ended question, and it's just asking about any adjustments for COVID-19 that we needed to make because of the pandemic. And any adjustments to the SED forecasting that needed to be made because of the pandemic. So if you have any, I'll give it a minute or two for people to provide their comments or observations. And again, it could be one word or a couple of sentences about how you feel we did with the adjustments to the plan, to the public outreach, to the SED forecasting in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay. I'll move on to the next question. This one asks about any comments on the consideration of transformative change. So those are just what Jerry listed off in the slides. Could have been about, we just want to collect your comments on anything about how you feel we address e-commerce or distribution services like 3D printing and those kind of transformative change factors that were taken into account when developing Plan 2050 or moving forward. So I'll give it a couple of minutes. And if while we're doing the rest of the presentation, you think of a comment, you can also place it in the comment message board. And that is like easily accessible in the button features at the bottom of your screen if you're using a computer. And so I'll hand it back to Jared to talk about the vision, goals, and objectives.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So this is really the guts of the plan in many ways. So considering our future needs as context, what do we plan to do? and our members have fashioned a shared vision and a number of strategic goals and objectives that will lead to actions that will answer that question. That's what we'll go through next. So next slide, Jessica. So the vision statement that's been developed by our members starts off with this preamble, pointing out that, NYMTC is made up of elected appointed officials. And when they come together as NYMTC, they recognize that mobility, the ability of people and goods to move easily and safely to, from, and between locations, is crucial to the lives of everyone who resides in, works in, or visits within the NYMTC planning region. Given that, we or they aspire to ensure that the mobility provided reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner. They aspire to invest efficiently for these transportation needs, and they aspire to respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. So that's sort of the preamble to the shared vision statement. Then the statement goes on to list 5 goals that the plan really is organized around: safety and security, reliable and easy travel, planning for changing demand, reducing environmental impacts, and resiliency. You heard those 5 goals in the video as their goal statements. Next slide. Also in the video, you heard about 6 guiding principles that are also defined as part of the shared vision: considering the needs of all users, making the best use of federal resources, monitoring performance, supporting multi-agency approaches, engaging the public, and harnessing technological advancements. So as this vision is being pursued, those 6 guiding principles will have helped to define some of the actions that are being proposed to be taken. Next slide. And back to Jessica for our next interactive exercise.
Great, thank you, Jerry. So as Jerry mentioned, the 5 vision goals are kind of guided the development of Plan 2050. Now we want to ask you to rank in terms of your relative importance, how these vision goals should be in order, in terms of how important they are to you. So you'll notice on your Poll Everywhere platform, and you can access the poll using pollev.com/NYMTC. For those who joined a little bit later in the presentation, you can select the option and then use the up and down arrows to order the vision goals. And as you see, some responses are coming in now. I'll just give it a moment or two to announce kind of the final ranking. And it seems like reducing environmental impacts has been ranked number 1. Number 2 has been reliable and easy travel. Number 3 has been ranked resiliency. Oh, and there's a shift now. Resiliency is now number 1. And then surprisingly, number 2 is both. Oh. Okay, I'll give it another moment or two before I announce any of the rankings. Okay, it seems like safety and security. Oh. Okay, it seems like reliable and easy travel has been ranked number 1. Number 2 is safety and security, along with resiliency. And 4 is reducing environmental impacts. And 5 is planning for changing demand. And so now we'll go to the next ranking activity. And that is, how would you rank the guiding principles that Jerry read off? And so these are the guiding principles, just truncated a bit so that everyone can see them on their screen. And so those are considering the needs of all users, the best use of federal resources, monitoring performance, supporting multi-agency approaches, engaging the public, and harnessing technological advancements. So we're just asking you to rank those guiding principles in terms of their relative importance to you. And I'll give it a moment for you all to place your rankings. And it seems like some of the ranking results are coming in. I just also want to note, if we moved on to a question and you're not seeing it on the device you're using to access pollev.com, you can hit refresh in your browser window, and that will take you to the most recent question that's being asked on the screen. Your responses will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about the responses getting lost. The program will record those. And it seems like some more rankings are coming in. I'll give that a moment or two. Okay. And it seems like number one has been considering the needs of all users. Ranked number two is engaging the public. Ranked number three is both the best use of federal resources and supporting multi-agency approaches. Number five has been harnessing technological advancements. And then number six is monitoring this performance. So now I'll move on to our third comment, question prompt. And so this is just a similar open-ended question that we've asked before. And you can place your observation on the 5 vision goals and or the 6 guiding principles. And so we just want any comments or observations that you have on those that did guide the development of Plan 2050. So you can just place your comments and hit submit, and we'll read them out loud to the group. Another way that you can also submit your comments is through the comment message board, just in case we move on and you have a question or an observation or comment on these 5 goals and 6 guiding principles. I do also want to remind everyone that we will be addressing all comments in the final plan. So we will respond to your comments. And seeing no comments, I'll move on to, someone just responded and said that meeting the needs of the public is a priority. And we 100% agree with that at NYMTC and our member agencies. I'll give it a couple more minutes for those who are still typing in their comments or observations. Okay. I'll pass it back to Jerry.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, so moving along, for each of these individual goals, there are 5 of them, we've organized this part of the plan around each of them. There are goal modules for each of them that provide a description of the goal beyond what it says, related objectives, talk about recent trends, current conditions, and existing initiatives related to the goal, and then recommend strategies and actions, and provide a list of performance metrics going forward that can monitor that particular goal. So these goal modules are the strategic portion of the plan. We want to give you a flavor of what this is. Again, there's a lot of information here that we can't necessarily go through in detail, but we want to at least give you a flavor of these modules for each of the goals. Next slide, Jessica. So safety and security, the objectives, as you see here, ensuring that investments in physical assets protect the safety of passengers and freight systems, promoting safe streets and intersections, keeping the transportation system secure from threats, coordinating safety management, training, and education across jurisdictional boundaries, and improving the safety and security of system operations. Those are the 5 objectives that have been identified by our members for this particular goal. Next slide. There are a number of trends and current conditions that are described in the plan. You can see them here in terms of various types of fatalities and serious injury rates, public transportation safety, freight safety and security, current conditions looking at motor vehicle crashes, pedestrian safety, micromobility safety, which is a whole emerging area, modal safety generally, and transportation security. And a number of existing initiatives are identified, legislation, policies, and programs and plans, and you can see the areas that they are identified in. So this is the overall scan of conditions and trends and activities that are happening now. Next slide. This particular module then recommends strategies and actions that fall into a number of different categories: planning and research initiatives, data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment, planning process recommendations, and program recommendations. And within program recommendations, there are specific items for regional guidance programs and specific items for education and training programs. All that detail is available in the web portal. You'll see a link below that we would urge you to take a look. Obviously, we can't spend a lot of time going through each individual recommended strategy and action. But you can, in fact, do that on your own and to go through and see what is included in the plan for each, or proposed in the plan for each of these categories. Next slide. And then finally, these are the performance metrics that are that are recommended for safety and security goal: number of fatalities, fatality rate, number of serious injuries, serious injury rate, number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, and the number of public transportation fatalities, injuries, and safety events. So that is the first module, safety and security. I believe we have a Jessica exercise here. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. So for most of the goals, you'll see that we'll have an open-ended question just asking you for your comments or observations on that module. This is our first module. It's a safety and security module. And so we're asking you to provide any input on the information that Jerry presented. And that could be anything from your reactions to the performance metrics, your observations about the trends, the current conditions, as well as the existing initiatives that we briefly went over, or any of the categories of recommendations that Jerry went over. So I'll give everybody a moment or two to provide their input on the safety, specifically on the safety and security module. And as Jerry mentioned, for each of these modules, there's a lot more information in the Plan 2050 document that we developed, and we urge you to just go and visit that document and look it over in depth and provide your comments before the end of the comment period, which is July 27th. So I'll give it a moment or two.
And folks, we understand that commentary today may be difficult, but just in case you have any thoughts about anything that's overlooked in your view or anything like that, this is at least an opportunity. There will be time, as Jessica said, to comment before the end of the comment period also, once you've had a chance to consider things in more detail. Okay, let's move on to the next module. Reliable and easy travel. You see the objectives here: rebuild, replace, and modernize assets, improve first and last mile connections and access to transit, providing more frequent and reliable transit service, improving accessibility to the transportation system for users of all abilities, investing and improving the integration of the multimodal transit network, improving the integration of freight modes and facilities, investing in collection and sharing of quality transportation data, and promoting equitable transportation and workplace access opportunities for all populations, regardless of age, ability, race, ethnicity, or income. So those are the objectives that were identified by our members for this particular goal. If we move on to the scan slide, you can see some of the trends and conditions that are described here. Current risks. Key in the risks, I think, is the aging transportation system relative to funding. That is all described. And of course, safety and security is always a risk with an overall system, but climate change is putting additional stresses on the system. And coordination and access, we have a very complicated system, many jurisdictions, and how to bring that together into a more perfect union, so to speak, for the user is a major risk. And you can see some of the existing initiatives in terms of asset management, various types of funding programs, and freight programs. Next slide. Recommended strategies and actions fall within these categories for this particular goal. The first three are familiar from the other one, but the program recommendations are organized around transit access programs, transit service enhancement programs, and freight access programs. And again, that link will take you to the web portal, which includes both a summary and the full document, which can give you additional detail on what these are. And then finally, finishing up, we have the performance metrics that are identified for this goal. Pavement metrics, bridge metrics, and transit metrics. They are all about the age and condition of these different aspects, physical aspects of the transportation system.
Great, thank you, Jerry.
Sure.
So now we'll just collect comments and observations on the reliable and easy travel slides that Jerry just presented. And you can even include your reactions to the objectives under this reliable and easy travel module, as well as any of the other information presented. So that could be the performance metrics, as well as the existing initiatives, similar, including the asset management programs and that Jerry has mentioned. So I'll give everybody a minute or two to just record their observations.
And Jessica, also
comments.
importantly, if there are any comments on the objectives that the members have defined, that would be in the mix also.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next goal module.
Actually, it seemed like something came in.
Yes.
And this was a question, how do you handle transit in areas that don't support fixed route? And so, as I mentioned, we're collecting comments and any input today, and we will address them in the final plan.
Right, but you know, this does fit into some of the objectives that have to do with first and last mile access, and general access to transportation certainly would be relevant to this particular comment / question. So it's a good one. It's a key one as we move out of the pandemic, I think. Okay, let's move on to the next module. This goal module is planning for changing demand. You see the objectives here, investing in capacity to satisfy demand and relieve overcrowding. And we understand that, you know, that's a little different now coming out of the pandemic, but we, again, are looking in the longer term as opposed to the immediate term. And so that's why this objective is still relevant. Expanding the reach of systems to underserved communities and emerging markets, encouraging walking, biking, transitory development, and other sustainable strategies, modernizing local freight networks, and incorporating emerging and innovative transportation services and tools into efficient network design. So those are the 5 objectives for this particular goal. Here's the scan. As you can see, the trends, the current risks and conditions. I think, you know, the current risks and conditions, I think, particularly the first one, changing demand, is certainly, we're experiencing a lot in that area based just on the pandemic, but demand was changing before the pandemic also, mainly related to emerging types of transportation and emerging technologies and so forth. You can see the existing initiatives here that are covered in this particular goal. Next slide. So the first 2 should be familiar, first 2 categories of recommended strategies and actions, but under program recommendations, those are organized around complete streets programs, which provide access for all modes where feasible, transit access programs, and shared mobility Shared mobility being the emerging area of sharing cars, sharing bicycles, sharing rides in microtransit and in ride hailing and so forth. This is an entire emerging area of transportation. And the link on the bottom will take you to the details there. The performance metrics that were identified for this particular goal module include VMT per capita, VMT being vehicle miles of travel, so how much vehicle use is there for individual people in our region, person hours of delay, public transportation system reliability, and then several statistics like level of travel time reliability, travel time index, and truck travel time reliability. And over to Jessica.
Great, thanks, Jerry. And so again, we're providing another opportunity for you to comment on the planning for changing demand module. And again, if you'd like to provide any of your comments or observations on the module objectives, as well as any of those recommended categories, recommendation categories that Jerry mentioned, and that could be any observations or comments on program recommendations like the shared mobility or transit access category, as well as providing any of your comments or observations on the trends and existing conditions, as well as the current initiatives. So I'll give you a minute or two. And just as a reminder, if you are joining late to poll and you're seeing the poll activity on the screen, you can participate in the poll activity at pollev.com/NYMTC. You can also provide your comments in the comment message board and via a comment form that we have on our website, on our moving forward website up until July 27th. So we have a comment that just came in. It says, it looks like SOVs increased. What are the plans for this? Jerry, do you have any comments?
Well, again, this is a very key part of what's in the plan. And if you look into, I mean, we can't necessarily answer this question, but if you look into the recommended actions and strategies and some of the programs, projects, and studies that are recommended in the plan, there's an emphasis on reducing VMT, vehicle miles of travel, and increasing person travel. It's a great question. We'll certainly respond to it in this phase of public review, and I think it's covered certainly in the plan.
Great, thank you. Now we'll pass it on to the reducing
Great.
environmental impact.
All right, so we have 2 more goals left, 2 more goal modules, and then we're done with that. So thank you for your patience. We'll keep going. I know it's a little tedious, but it's important input to hear back from people. Here are the objectives for reducing environmental impact. Interestingly, the first one is alternatives to single occupant vehicle trips, which is the comment from the previous exercise. So that is a specific objective, encouraging lower emissions alternatives to trucking, modernizing fleets to higher standard and lower emission vehicles, efficiently managing limited roadway capacity to mitigate congestion, promoting responsible environmental stewardship, particularly in transportation projects, and addressing unequal impacts of transportation emissions on communities. Those are the 6 objectives identified for this particular goal. Next slide. Here are the scan items. You notice under trends, we're focused here in the plan on emissions, air pollutants, and so forth, and observing those trends from into the current time. Criteria air pollutants are those identified under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, and of course, vehicle miles of travel is a generator of motor vehicle emissions. So, watching that is important. Current conditions you see there, and some of the existing initiatives. I would point out the very first one here, which is unique to New York State, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is looking at the future and targeting a future reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. So that's a very important part of the overall mix going forward. Next slide. Just to indicate something about that with greenhouse gases, we have some general trends here on the left of recent years. Whoops, go backwards. Okay. And then interestingly, or importantly, I should say, on the right, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which calls for economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reductions from 1990 levels of 40% by 2030 and no less than 85% by 2050. So greenhouse gas emissions tend to be moderating from transportation somewhat, but certainly the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act will put additional pressure on and requirements on to continue that moderation and actually reduce significantly into the future. Next slide. Having said that, vehicular travel in our region is actually pretty efficient relative to other major regions. This comparison is of urbanized areas across the country. You can see New York City has by far the most population in the urbanized area, but the daily vehicle miles of travel per capita is amongst the lowest, and that is just a testament to the extensive transit services that we have throughout the region. But notice to the right of that, the travel time index, which indicates if one is reasonable travel in terms of distance and speed, the higher you go above one, it means the slower you're going, essentially. So in terms of that travel time index, New York City is not necessarily doing as well as it is in terms of travel per capita. So there's a lot of congestion out there, despite the fact that so many trips are being absorbed by the transit system. There's still congestion and there's still demand that exceeds supply of capacity. So it's a mixed bag in terms of our region, but we do tend to be a pretty efficient region. Next slide. This is a major reason why we're so efficient. I love this slide because it really underscores the difference in transit systems based on ridership. These are the top 10 urbanized areas, and you can see New York, Newark, that should be New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, just way outweighs every other system. And these are some very significant systems in comparison. And that is a lot of the reason why our region tends to be efficient. But that efficiency does not extend to eliminating congestion, certainly. Next slide. So the recommended strategies and actions, you see some of the categories here, but significantly under program recommendations, they're organized around community planning programs, community alternative programs, public messaging and marketing programs, vehicular emissions programs, and innovative materials programs. And again, details of these categories can be found on the web portal, both in summary form and the document itself. And finally, in terms of metrics, these metrics are very much focused on just monitoring emissions and pollutant levels, as well as travel through vehicle miles of travel and vehicle hours of delay. Okay, Jessica.
Great, thanks. And so we'll move on to gathering any comments about the reducing environmental impact module. And that could even be any comments or observations on the highlights that Jerry provided, and those highlights on, there could be any comments on the greenhouse gas emission highlight that Jerry provided, as well as the vehicular travel and the transit usage, or the efficiency of the transit usage in the region. We'd also love to hear your comments or observations on any of the objectives or the performance metrics that we presented in these previous slides. We just got a comment that reads, where does global warming fit in? And so
John, just on that point, obviously key question. I think it fits in right into the goal statement, and what you see in the objectives is an attempt to address the areas that produce the emissions. So if we're looking at reducing environmental impact, particularly with regard to climate change, we're looking at reducing vehicular emissions of greenhouse gases, not only greenhouse gases, but certainly for climate change, they're critical. And so you're looking at overall travel, vehicular travel, and how efficient the system is in terms of moving people rather than vehicles. And that, in turn, has an impact on emissions. So that's not a response to this particular comment. It's a key comment, but it's right there in this particular goal statement.
And so we'll move on to the next and final module.
Yes, the last one. So thank you again for your patience moving through these, but what you're providing is very helpful to us. So resiliency of the system, you see the objectives here: protect and fortify assets, invest in sea level rise and climate change risk analyses, improve regional coordination on emergency and long-term responses, and enhancing the transportation network's resiliency by increasing travel options and redundancies. So those are the 4 objectives identified for this goal. Moving on to the scan, the trends significantly are environmental and climate stressors, but also human stressors such as terrorist attacks and cybersecurity and those types of things, cyber attacks. And then, of course, public health emergencies. We're just experiencing a sort of a once-in-a-lifetime public health emergency. But it's not the only time this century that's happened in our region, just at different scales, and not necessarily pandemics, some epidemics. So public health emergencies are relevant to a resilient transportation system because they certainly affect transportation. And the existing initiatives, we try to inventory what's happening now, particularly in the region post Hurricane Sandy. There were many programs instituted to harden the system and to respond to the damage of Sandy. Beyond that issue of extreme weather and climate change and sea level rise, we also have identified some initiatives related to cybersecurity and counterterrorism, and also public health programs are inventoried there too. Next slide. Not much here that's specific. These categories you've seen before, but there are a number of research recommendations that are specific to resiliency and understanding, how the effects of climate change and the effects of sea level rise is obviously critical to this particular goal. So continuing to do those risk analyses and collect data about those topics. Not necessarily original source data, maybe secondary source data, but that's an important part of this particular goal. Next slide. And then the performance metrics are really focused on the amount of vulnerable lane miles, bridges and culverts, trailways, bikeways, greenways, grade separated bus facilities. And then the percent that have been hardened over time. Hardened meaning that there's been some treatment given that will help them resist extreme weather and or storm surge and or inundation. That's also on the right-hand side, that's also related to transit, freight, track miles, transit terminals, and you can see rapid transit commuter rail stations, transit yards and facilities, and again, the percent hardened. So we spent a lot of effort trying to identify the vulnerable transportation system given the experiences of Hurricane Sandy and the previous storms before that, and also vulnerable in the sense of forecasts of sea level rise into the future. Jessica, back to you.
Great, thank you. So now we're just seeking comments on this resiliency module, and that could be anything on the existing initiatives or the current trends, anything in response to our transportation resiliency in regards to how the pandemic has affected us, but as well as any other health emergencies or environmental emergencies. We are also looking for any comments on the observations as well as the performance metrics that Jerry mentioned. So I'll give it a moment or two for comments. And you can also provide comments in the chat message board if we move past this question and you have, if you have any additional comments or observations on the resiliency module. Okay. Seems like something has come in. The comment is we need to be very aggressive in, I'm assuming they mean aggressive in the policies and the strategies that and the recommendations that we've outlined in Plan 2050 to make sure that we ensure a resilient transportation system for all. Jerry, do you have any more comments?
I would just add to that also in terms of the actual hardening, which a lot has occurred since Sandy. But again, we have a very extensive transportation system in this multi-state region. So addressing all those needs is always challenging. But I assume that aggressiveness also has to do with actually getting out there and making the facilities hardened against these stressors.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. We'll move on now.
All right, so thank you for wading through the goals. We're going to go through some additional information here. Our target is to finish at 1:30, and I think it's about 8 minutes after 1 now, so I think we'll easily achieve the 1:30 end, and maybe a little sooner than that. So we're required to also lay out how we plan to pay for the plan. And if you go to the next slide, Jessica, the federal regulations require that the plan contain a financial plan, which includes, as you can see, system level estimates of costs and revenues, estimates of funds that will be reasonably available for plan implementation in the long term, and any additional financing strategies that we are recommending for the implementation of the plan. I just want to point out here that, you know, the numbers you're about to see, first of all, they're colossal, but this isn't a budget, it's a plan. Many assumptions went into this. They're detailed in the actual plan document. And keep in mind that we're doing this in a long range framework. So it's a forecast. It's a forecast of what could be and how much it will likely cost to do some basic things on the system. Next slide. So the cost and revenue categories fall into there are three categories: operations and maintenance, system preservation, system enhancement. And this is for the federally supported transportation system, which is the majority of the system, but it's the part of the system that is eligible for federal support. Financial support. There are facilities in our system that are not. For example, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is considered to be a self-financed public authority. They use very little federal funds, if at all, and therefore their facilities are not part of this financial assessment. But they're obviously very important to the region, and you know, it is possible under circumstances to use federal dollars for Port Authority facilities. So that's where the term federally supported comes from. Next slide. So what you see here, you're going to see some big numbers and so forth, but this is our set of forecasts dealing with these categories. This is operations and maintenance. So this is O&M cost on the left by agency for the federally supported transportation system. You can see the large chunk of the pie that is the MTA and supporting the MTA's vast operations, and then much smaller numbers for the constituent counties and for New York City and New York State's portions for day-to-day operations and maintenance. On the right-hand side are our estimates of the revenues that will likely to be available from county and public authority budgets and so forth, forecasted into the future relative to the costs. And as you can see here, we've approximated that sufficient revenue will be available to operate and maintain the system. Again, these are long-term forecasts with many assumptions, and they have to be, our forecasts have to be significant or substantial enough to be able to satisfy our federal overseers in terms of how we put this together. There are details about that in the plan itself. These are just some of the numbers. You're talking about $906 billion overall cost of operations and maintenance of the entire system, and a similar level of revenues for operations and maintenance. Next slide. One thing I would point out, these are all in year of expenditure dollars, which are dollars that are inflated to the year that they are actually used. We're required to do that by federal regulation. So on the left, you see the system preservation costs by mode. $750 billion over the 29-year plan through the 2050 horizon year. And the majority of that going to the transit system. The transit facilities are extensive in our region and expensive to preserve. Pavements and bridges, much smaller percentages relative to transit. Total cost $750 billion. And then next to that, you have system enhancements. So these would be additions to the transportation system as opposed to just preservation activities. They're itemized. There's a line. The first line is minor system enhancements, generally under $100 million. Everything else is itemized as major system enhancements. and costs. The total cost for system enhancement right now is about $50 billion. That's B with a B. And you kind of get a sense here that a lot of our resources, majority of our resources that come into our region are used to preserve the system as opposed to enhance it. So we have to come up with, our members have come up with innovative ways to then pay for system enhancements, because it's important to preserve, but it's also important to respond to the future by enhancing. Next slide. These are the estimated funds for plan implementation, itemized. I would just call your attention to the orange box on the right, which shows that, in our projections, the federal contribution is very significant, almost $160 billion over the life of the plan, but it's roughly 20% of the funds that we estimate will be needed to implement the plan. So this is highly leveraged money, with state and local resources being 80%, the other 80%. So keep that in mind, that although the federal dollars are very important to our region, we wouldn't be able to get by without them. We are leveraging those dollars extensively with state and local resources, particularly resources from public authorities like the MTA and so forth. Total resources here are just over $800 billion. Next slide. We do look at additional financing strategies, most of which are already being used: public-private partnerships, value capture, what was done to extend the number 7 subway to the far west side of Midtown. Debt financing has been used extensively. This is bonding or other means of debt financing. Some discretionary federal funding programs that are competitive nationally and are granted at the discretion of the Secretary of Transportation. And of course, cordon pricing, which is being developed in Lower Manhattan at this point. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Jerry. So we just want to collect any comments you have on how we're planning to pay for the plan, and the cost breakdowns that Jerry provided. So if you have any comments on the forecasts or the system enhancement projects that Jerry went through, we'd love to hear them. We'd love to hear any observation or comments that you have on this part of the presentation.
And I acknowledge that, I'm sorry, Jessica, I just wanted to acknowledge that, I provided in the couple of minutes we had numbers, but there's a lot of backup to those numbers that is in the plan document itself. And of course, we can't go through that. We could spend the whole hour and a half just on that. So we understand that these are just the basic numbers, and you may wish to look in more detail at what's in the plan before you comment.
Yeah, you beat me to it.
Sorry, Jessica.
No, it's okay. So I'm going to move on to the next piece of the presentation.
Yes, so now we're going into, and this will be, there's a huge amount of information here that we're not going to be able to cover in any kind of detail. We're actually not going to ask for your comments on these, but we wanted to let you know about some of the special elements that are required in the plan, and also the the projects, programs, and studies recommended by the plan, as well as the congestion management process status report, which accompanies the plan. So let's start with the special elements. Next slide. So we are required in developing this plan to provide a specific pedestrian bicycle element. We're required to provide a coordinated public transit human services transportation plan. These are all appendices to the plan. That's looking at specialized transportation services and how those interact with public transportation that's provided. There's a regional freight element to the plan, which is a topic in and of itself. We're also required to put together an environmental justice and Title VI assessment. That would be Title VI under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So one of the appendices is an assessment of the plan from that perspective. And we're required to identify environmental mitigation measures and consult with agencies that can help us with that. So there's an appendix on that also. Again, we don't have time to go through each of these in any kind of detail. We would encourage you to go to the web portal and take a look at these. If you have a particular interest in one of these areas, then you can look at that exclusively. or you can just get a sense of these. But there are, recommendations in terms of projects, programs, and studies that are related to each of these topical areas. Next slide. Now, we did go over the recommended actions and strategies that are related to the goal modules, but the plan also recommends a number of transportation improvement projects, transportation programs, and transportation studies going into the future. And they're organized basically by geography. So there's basically a list for each individual suburban county and each individual New York City borough. We can, I guess, Jessica, we can show this quickly just to give everyone a sense of what it looks like. So if you go into the plan portal, you can see here that there's a map which visualizes all the mappable, all the spatial recommended projects, programs, and studies. There's also a list of everything beneath. You can hover over individual items. You can also zoom in and out. And by doing so, you can get information for your area or for the region in general about what's being recommended in the plan. Some of these recommended projects and programs are in the fiscally constrained element in the plan, and that's the part that's defined through the financial plan that we just went through. Some of them are speculative vision projects, which are not part of the constrained plan, but rather potential future actions that could be taken. But there's an awful lot of detail in terms of there's several hundred projects, programs, and studies identified in this element of the plan. And we don't have time, obviously, today to go through all these on an individual basis, but you can certainly explore this information through the web portal. We also have coordinated development emphasis areas identified, which are essentially an attempt to bring and better coordinate land use development with transportation. So these are areas where the members have identified desired growth areas, sustainable growth areas where either existing or planned transportation capacity meets the needs of increased demand and hopefully in a more efficient way. So this is really a big chunk of the sustainability element of the plan. And we also have to detail the major metropolitan transportation investments that we were identifying. If you go back to don't do this, Jessica, but if you go back to that slide, which listed the major investments, those have to be detailed in a specific way, and that's included in this appendix also. So those are generally improvements of $100 million or more that are either underway or proposed for the future. And then finally, there is a congestion management process status report that is not part of the plan, but accompanies the plan. If we go to the next slide, we can talk about that a little bit. So federal requirements are that since our planning area meets the definition of a transportation management area, we have to systematically forecast congestion. We have to produce specific performance measurements to identify levels of congestion, and we have to prepare a program to reduce that congestion. So we have a congestion management process that fulfills these requirements. However, I would point out that the program to reduce the congestion is in fact contained in the plan. So this isn't something yet separate from the plan. This is related to the plan. And that program to reduce congestion is included in the plan. Next slide. So every time we publish a new regional transportation plan, we publish a status report on the congestion management process. This is all federally required, and it's important to funding for system enhancements, among other things. The CMP status report provides an overview of the congestion management process and its methodology. It presents the results of the most recent analysis and forecasts, and it describes the strategies committed to in the plan to address the current and forecasted levels of traffic congestion. Next slide. This is just, there's a lot of stuff here, but this is just an example of the performance metrics identified in the CMP status report that are specifically related to congestion on the transportation system. Next slide. We do have the peer region comparisons that we talked about a little bit earlier. They're in there. So we look at congestion first at the regional level. Next slide. Then we break it down to the county and borough level, looking at forecasted conditions in each individual county and borough. Daily vehicle miles of travel is on the left, and daily vehicle hours of delay is on the right. And the blue color is the base year of 2019, and the reddish color is the forecast year of 2050. Next slide. And then we look at each county and borough and analyze that. So we're talking about county level congestion forecasts, and we also include in there a bottleneck analysis during various travel periods, so forth. So there's a very detailed assessment of what's happening at the county and borough level also. So the CMP is actually at multiple levels. Next slide. Finally, the congestion management strategies and system enhancement investments are detailed. There's actually a toolbox, a generic toolbox of strategies to be considered in the planning process to deal with congestion. That's unique to the CMP status report. And then we highlight the relevant goals, objectives, strategies, and actions from the plan moving forward, and the system enhancement investments programmed and moving forward, and the federal fiscal years 2020 through 24 transportation improvement program. So the CMP status report is largely an assessment and a set of forecasts, but it does tie into the specific items in the plan that are related to addressing congestion. Next slide.
Great. So this is our last Poll Everywhere activity for the day. We're just asking if you have any general comments on anything that was presented, and that could include the sections that we just talked about, the programs, projects, and studies section, the congestion management overview that Jerry gave, and also the overview of the appendices that are found at the end of the moving forward plan. And we again also urge you to take a deeper dive into each of these sections and the other sections that we provided an overview on today, and that's so just you can get a better understanding of the plan itself, and you can provide us comments up until July 27th. And so I'll give you all a couple of minutes to provide your comments. And Jerry, if there's any concluding thoughts.
Just this is a general opportunity here to any reactions that you have on anything, actually, you can, you're welcome to place it in this particular, in response to this particular prompt. And if not, again, there's still time, and there's an opportunity to submit whatever you're thinking. You're welcome. Yes, and I agree with that last part of this, which is there's an awful lot of stuff here, and if you want to plow through it and give us other comments, please do. Okay. I think that's the last one. Yes. Oh no, the schedule going forward. Oh my God, how can I forget the schedule? That's what I'm going to do tomorrow. So yes, there is a schedule going forward. So quickly, we are in the end game of the development and adoption of the plan. If we can go to the next slide, you can see some of the key milestones coming up. If we can go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So the comment period opened on June 28th. It's closing on July 27th. Our Program Finance and Administration Committee is meeting on August 19th to make a recommendation to our full council to adopt the final draft of the plan and the CMP status report. And then on September 9th, the council will meet the council principals, if you recall from the video. The county executives, the commissioners, and so forth will meet to adopt the final draft plan and the CMP status report, and at which time there'll be formal transmittal to the federal oversight agencies, who will have some time to review and so forth. The actual start of the next federal fiscal year is October 1st. So our objective is to have the plan in place for October 1st and hopefully have federal sign-off on the plan by October 1st. And that continues the process forward, maintains our eligibility for federal funding. The planning process continues. So that is the plan development end game. Next slide. So this is the last slide. We really appreciate the time you spent with us today. We did do it in 90 minutes, which is great. There's a lot of stuff here, so you're more than welcome to continue to look at this and continue to consider commenting. But for whatever you did today, whatever you learned, whatever you provided, we thank you very much for your time. And there is another session tonight at 7. If you really like this and you want to come back, feel free, but I doubt that's going to be the case. So thank you all for your time and your attention, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And I would also encourage you to visit the NYMTC.org/moving forward page to review any of the themes and topics that we covered in the presentation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. Take care, everyone. Have a good day and stay safe.
All right.
Take
Good
care.
night.